briefly now to introduce the webcast. I'll also be joining later to moderate the Q&A session. So I'm just going to switch off my video now and hand you over to Rafe and Marcelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Andy.
So thanks all for joining. It's great to be here with Dell and We Are the City. Today, Marcelle and I will be talking to you about understanding, preparing for, and mitigating cyber threats. But really, that's sort of maybe like an icebreaker for some of the other sort of conversation we can have about our careers to date, how we got here, our experiences, and yeah, we'll also dive into some of the sort of really interesting threats we see, we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So this is what we have for you today. We'll be sort of speaking for 45 minutes with a 15-minute Q&A session at the end. So please, would really love you to sort of get involved, submit questions through the question feature there, and Andy will moderate those for us at the end, and it'd be great to be able to answer your questions. So we'll go through a bit about sort of our career journey to date. Marcelle and I from sort of, well, first of all, I'm based in the UK and Marcelle's over in the US, and then a very sort of different sort of career sort of milestones. So I think it'd be interesting getting those sort of different perspectives. Talk to you a bit about Secureworks and the Counter Threat Unit where we work, and then dive into the threat landscape. So high level sort of overview of how that has evolved in terms of computing, how we deal with information, and how the risks and threats have evolved in step with that. The top 3 threats that we currently see day to day that are impacting our customers, taking money out of the pockets of companies around the world, really. Talk to you a bit about threat groups that we track. So this has become a sort of an interesting area over the past sort of 5 years or so, looking to cluster the activity that we see threat actors, hackers, criminal groups performing, and tracking that in order to sort of keep on top of their tactics. We'll look at some common intrusion techniques, and then a whole load of stuff that we've seen in relation to COVID-19, the sort of pivot to COVID-19 as a theme for all sorts of criminal activity. Has been a fascinating topic for us. Marcelle's done a lot of great work there, and we'll go through some of the interesting stories that we've looked into. Then finally, some mitigations and general recommendations, things that you can do as individuals or as companies to protect yourselves. Okay, so let's dive straight in. So about us. So as Andy said, my name's Rafe Pilling. I'm a senior security researcher with the Counter Threat Unit. I've been with Secureworks as a company for about 14 years now, coming up on 14 years, and worked across a range of different departments within the organization. And I guess that's one great thing about Secureworks. There is a diversity of opportunities, diversity of roles, and it's been great to be able to sort of take advantage of those. So I started off in the Security Operations Center. I was actually working for a smaller Scottish-based managed security services company called DNS Limited at the time, and they were later acquired by Secureworks. So as I'll talk about in a bit, some of the things I've learned across my career, but this was one of the early lessons for me. I applied, well, as a security professional looking to sort of enter the market in Scotland. I'd sort of naturally assumed that I would have to go down to London to find the sort of work that I wanted. But I found this company, DNS Limited, and they were looking to hire an ethical hacker, and had this great sort of job write-up. I was absolutely unqualified for that job, but it sounded really, really interesting. So I applied anyway, and got an interview. We went through the interview. They were quite nice. The technical sort of screen was quite rigorous, and I think it highlighted to both of us that I had a lot of work to do there. But they offered me a role in the SOC, and that was a fantastic learning experience. So as a SOC analyst, I was helping customers with everything from firewall changes to sort of manage strong authentication, multi-factor authentication. I spent a lot of time triaging client email for malicious content, a whole range of things. And it was a very steep sort of learning curve. The company invested in me with a number of training courses from different product vendors. And it was a great way to sort of jumpstart my career, and really came about by applying for that role that I thought was going to be interesting. So obviously I'd applied for an ethical hacking role, and the notion behind ethical hacking, I should probably explain, is that we test the security of an organization by simulating the attacks that an adversary or a threat actor would carry out against an organization, see how that works, see how it looks from the defender perspective, how it manifests, and help them sort of plug any gaps in their security controls. So that's where I wanted to go. So even while I was I was an analyst in the Security Operations Center, I focused on the aspects of that role that would help me get into that sort of ethical hacking or penetration testing, as it was also known, role. And we now call that sort of thing, it's evolved into a sort of a different type of activity, a more comprehensive activity known as red teaming. And again, so if you ever see the term red team or hear someone talking about red teaming, that's about simulating the adversary and essentially attacking the organization in a controlled fashion. So you don't do any damage to the organization, but you do exercise the security controls and highlight any weaknesses. I then moved on to sort of digital forensics and incident response. It was the time of Config, a big sort of worm outbreak, helping clients with recovery from that, or sort of getting that worm out of their network. Again, lots of sort of interesting learning. Since that time, lots of useful tools have been created, but back then it was very much sort of jerry-rigging your own analysis tools and scripts and bits and pieces. So I spent a few years doing that in our consultancy group, and I guess around maybe 2011, PCI DSS became a thing. So this is the payment card industry data security standard. It's about bringing a greater degree of control and security management to how payment card information was managed, and it was a great sort of turning point for security in the payment card space. So I got to be, I got nominated, invited to participate as an assessor for that standard, and went and assessed a number of client organizations with relation to their sort of security controls. I have to admit, audit was not my favorite part of my career, but again, it was certainly an interesting sort of learning experience, and it was great working with lots of different companies, going through their security controls, seeing what was working, what wasn't working, and helping them to rectify that. And that led on to a period of more sort of general consultancy type work with different organizations. But I was very much interested in this sort of emerging field of threat intelligence. We were starting to see what we call the threat intelligence reports coming out from other companies. And there had been a group formed within Secureworks, the Counter Threat Unit, that was doing similar sort of work. And this was about studying threat actor behavior, the tools they use, the techniques they use, and using that information to write countermeasures, and also to sort of inform and advise clients on how they can better protect themselves from that sort of activity. So I moved into a threat intelligence role in the Counter Threat Unit. Started off doing a lot of countermeasure development for sort of network-based stuff, the eye sensors we call it, and later on sort of hostile state actor tracking, which we will talk about in a bit. So in terms of some of the things I learned during that period, a big focus for me is always trying to do something I enjoy. We spend a huge amount of our lives at work in the office doing our jobs, and it's always been important to me to try and enjoy what I'm doing, you know, to make sure that the work I'm doing is interesting, that I'm learning things, that I'm helping people, and that sort of gives me a sense of satisfaction in my work. Second thing, work with great people. So I'm very fortunate to have had great teams of colleagues here at Secureworks, and also worked with some really great people at client organizations during that period as well. Continuous learning. Anyone who's in the sort of tech space, or probably a variety of industries these days, anything that involves tech or security, will know that things are always changing. New tools are coming in, new working practices, new capabilities, and it's about keeping on top of that the whole time. And of course, in our role in terms of threat actor tracking, it's about keeping up to speed with the adversary tactics and techniques, and making sure that we keep pace with what's going on out there. And the last piece is personal brand. So a good friend of mine in marketing has always sort of pushed this point. How you present yourself within the organization, and increasingly how you present yourself on social media, is very important. Important both to to appear professional, or to appear how you want to be perceived, but also to sort of help other people and take on things that you want to do. So I had the opportunity to do some mentoring with a local university, and see sort of students, give them some advice and guidance on how to progress with their careers, and that sort of thing is really sort of satisfying, to be able to sort of pass that sort of information back. Right, I've spoken for quite a while there. I'm going to pass you over to Marcelle, and she will take you through her story as to how she got where she is today.
Awesome. Thanks, Rafe. Thank you. So I'm very happy to be here today with everybody, and very excited to have been introduced to We Are the City. As everyone mentioned earlier, I am from the States, and I'm involved with a lot of different sort of diversity-centric groups here in the US. So it's fun to hear about some of the work that's happening in other parts of the world. But it was really interesting to hear Rafe's story. I hadn't actually heard it before. Our career paths are very, very different, which is not unusual in this industry at all. People who work in cybersecurity come from such a broad range of backgrounds, and it really does take all kinds of different skill sets and that sort of thing. So briefly about mine. First of all, I'm a career changer to cybersecurity. I've been working in cyber for about 10 years now. I had a completely different career before, doing operations and project management, and my last non-cyber job was managing capital projects for a municipality here in the States. So I got interested in cybersecurity. I had an opportunity to take some classes and then just fell in love with it. So from there, I started working in the US government space, doing, as it says there, network exploitation work and malware analysis, which was very interesting. Probably not as interesting as it sounds, because it also involved doing just lots of sort of grunt work research and writing lots and lots of reports. But I actually like all of those bits. So it was a great way to sort of get my feet wet in the field. And then from there, I moved on to private sector, where you have all the lovely things like being able to work from home and all that kind of thing, which I couldn't do in the government space. And I started out doing threat intel type research, and really kind of stuck with that as my area of expertise, I would say. My background in terms of study and the different kinds of work I've done also includes forensics. So I have a lot of different skills that I bring to the table, as well as all those core skills that are super useful that I learned along the way in the previous jobs. So now I'm a senior security researcher at Secureworks, just like Rafe. And I am the lead for emerging threats, which basically just means I try to keep my finger on the pulse of anything new and interesting that's coming down the pipeline with cybersecurity threats. And as you can imagine, that's a pretty busy job to have. So I'm looking at cybercrime and also activity from nation state type organizations outside of the main ones that are looked at by other teams. And then, as I mentioned, volunteerism is a big part of who I am. So I run competition programming for a nonprofit called Women's Society of Cyber Jitsu. We do a lot of amazing work helping people get skilled up to get into the field. There's a conference called the Diana Initiative. I'm the lead for competitions for that one. We're going to be running a cyber competition. CTF just means capture the flag. That anybody can do who is attending. That's happening in August. But there's many other groups that I'm involved with, and I'm gonna, could you flip to the next slide, Rafe? Yeah, so this will segue into, excuse me, the things I've learned. So first of all, finding your passion. This is a huge thing in the field of cybersecurity because it's so vast. When I first changed careers, I was thinking, oh, maybe I want to do policy because that was the only thing I could really wrap my head around. I didn't know any of the other things. I remember asking my friend like what the difference was between certified ethical hacker and CISSP, which I don't even remember what that stands for, but they're very, very different certifications for different kinds of work roles. One's like hacking, one's more like management. So figuring out what it is that you actually want to do is a big part of it. A resource that I like, and I can put this in the chat in a minute, is there's a nice cyber workforce framework that lists basically different job categories and all the different kinds of work roles within them and the kinds of like knowledge, skills, and abilities that are associated with that. So it's super handy for just sort of exploring what's out there. And then the other thing I would say, and this goes back to the volunteerism part, is to get involved. There's so many opportunities to work with different groups, and also just to get out there and go to like meetups or conferences and that kind of thing, just to get engaged in the community. Because while it's a vast field, it's kind of a small community, and it's not 6 degrees of separation in cybersecurity. It's more like 2 degrees of separation. Honing your skills is another part. Like once you kind of find out what it is that you really like to do, then work at it. So like for me, my favorite thing in the world is network forensics, looking at network traffic and trying to find badness. And that's something that I kind of stumbled upon, but now that's typically what people, I think of when they hear my name. And then last but not least, giving back. So I've had a lot of support along the way from different people and organizations and employers. So, giving back and mentoring and that kind of thing, I can't even say enough about like how important that is. So yeah, I think that's it for me on that slide. Rafe?
Okay, great. Thanks, Marcelle. Yeah, it's great seeing the, yeah, and we're just 2 people on the team with different backgrounds, but the variety of backgrounds is great. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Secureworks for those that aren't familiar with the organization, and just a bit about what we do. So Secureworks is a managed security service provider, part of the Dell family. We operate we have clients in sort of 50 plus countries around the world, 4,100 plus clients. We essentially, clients will buy sort of security controls technology, and we bring the sort of process and the people to help them run that. Whether it's managing the devices or monitoring them or taking their telemetry and enriching it with threat intelligence, or supporting them with incident response when they have incidents. But certainly that managed security estate gives us a vast set of security event telemetry, which is all the sort of things that are happening within those environments, both good and bad, and is very useful for us from a research perspective and keeping on top of the threat landscape across a variety of different geographies and across a range of verticals. So we're consuming in excess of 310 billion events on a daily basis. We have significant pools of security analysts, researchers, responders 300 plus on the security analyst front. There's something between 70, 80 people in the Counter Threat Unit. We have a huge team of incident responders and a whole bunch of other people that sort of support us in the organization. And we've been doing this for quite a long time. Secureworks have been around for a good long period, and we've been collecting data on attacks and on adversaries for quite a long time, in excess of 20 years of attack and sort of threat group data to support our research, and that just continues on a daily basis. So as an organization, we have 4 main areas. Managed security services is one of them, security risk and consulting, threat intelligence, where myself and Marcelle work, and incident response. And these areas all work together to bring different services to help clients and to provide different sort of capabilities and perspectives, all of which are very useful to us in the threat intelligence area, where we're collecting data from a lot of disparate sources and trying to make sense of that, trying to piece together the puzzle and figure out sort of what's going on, whether it's in a specific incident that we're supporting or more generally in terms of trends across the threat landscape. So we do a wide range of things: protecting customers, monitoring client environments for security incidents, research, responding, and analyzing data that we get in. The European headquarters for the company is up in Edinburgh, where I'm based, and the global headquarters is over in Atlanta. And we have SOCs in a number of different locations, and we have people all around the world. Just in the CTU, for example, we've got people in Australia, in the US, in the UK, in Japan, a whole sort of range of different countries. And one of the sort of major pivots, major focus for the organization at the moment is to take all of that learning, that expertise that we've done from a management perspective of other people's networks, and channel that into a software product that lets clients that want to do more of that for themselves and leverage those sort of capabilities, but take it on for themselves. Lots of things these days are transitioning to software. We hear the software-defined perimeter. We hear software as a service, and this is an extension of that, moving into a more sort of agile, software-driven world where we can rapidly analyze that data and take action to mitigate sort of threat actor or criminal activity. So Red Cloak threat detection response is one of the sort of manifestations of that pivot. So Marcelle and I have mentioned a few times, we work in the Counter Threat Unit. The Counter Threat Unit does a range of things. We provide threat intelligence support directly to clients, answering their questions, whether it's in relation to things they've seen in the news, incidents that they're having within their organization, things that they are looking forward at and would like some assistance with, whether it's malware, threat actors, vulnerabilities, trends that we see in the threat landscape, whatever it might be. We collect data from a wide variety of sources, process that into intelligence, and disseminate that to clients. We have a countermeasures group that will develop network and endpoint countermeasures. So that's looking at malicious activity on the network, on the wire, and also looking at it on the computers that you and I sort of use every day. So Marcelle and I both sit within a subgroup within the CTU, and Marcelle's going to talk you through sort of what we do as a team and some of the things we do.
Yeah, one of the things that I like about our team, and Rafe and I were talking about this the other day, is just the diversity of backgrounds. And as I was saying before, it really takes all kinds of different people to put together an effective team. And diversity in teams has been shown certainly to improve the effectiveness. So we are diverse in that we have a few women on the team, which is always a pleasant thing. I've worked on many teams where I was the only woman, And so it's nice to have a few others. And actually, to be honest, that was one of the things that attracted me about Secureworks. Oh, and I should mention too, Rafe said he's been with the company for 14 years. I haven't even hit a year yet, so I'm very new compared to him. But yeah, so it like definitely was something that made me interested in working there. So within the KIC, we have about 20 people, and it's a range of everything from people who spend their time looking at the code behind malware, which is very highly technical, to sort of the other end of the spectrum with threat research analysts who are taking in data from a variety of sources, you know, our internal information that we see from customers, also external information, just, you know, things that you can find in the news. We get information from partners like different governmental organizations. So collecting all that, as it shows so nicely in the image with the dots and arrows pointing at our brain, we are like little sponges absorbing all that. So yeah, so we have people on the team who primarily, you know, are analysts who collect that data and parse it into a usable product for our clients in the form of, you know, publications and that sort of thing. So yeah, so a wide variety of backgrounds, and that also makes it interesting too. Lots of different personality types, but I think one of the things that is good about our team is we're pretty effective at working together, even though we're split into different countries. I mean, we have obviously a contingent here in the US, a group in the UK, and then we actually have people in Australia as well. So we mostly work remotely. So this time of COVID-19 is not very different for me in terms of my day-to-day because I worked from home anyway. But yeah, so we still managed to collaborate and work together in ways that are a little bit surprising considering how spread out we are. I don't know, did you have any other thoughts about the team you wanted to add, Rafe?
I mean, I think just that maybe less so when I was working in other areas of sort of security technology, but much more so in the intelligence space. You become more aware of sort of things like cognitive bias and the advantage of bringing a diverse range of perspectives to discuss an issue, particularly when you're dealing with sort of small fragments of information. A big part of what we do as a job is interpreting those, and there's you know, every chance you're going to get that wrong. And so having people that can help you look at things in a different way, and it's surprising just how you think you've explored all the sort of possibilities, and then someone comes along and says something, and you can suddenly see the problem from a totally different perspective that just didn't occur to you before. And I find that sort of very interesting.
And different research techniques too, right? We all have different ways of tackling how we you know, dig into a project, and in fact we recently started sort of a weekly tradecraft discussion in our team where we do share that kind of information, and it's really useful because, you know, we all approach the research in different manners. So yeah, it's
a lot of creativity and sort of individual innovation that you can then sort of share across the group, which is really useful. Okay, so now we will take a look at some of the stuff that we look at sort of day to day, and some of the things we work on. So we spend a lot of time looking at the cyber threat landscape, and so I just want to take a moment to sort of step back and think about how the sort of threat landscape, the information landscape, has changed over, let's say, the last 50, 100 years. There used to be a time when everything was on paper records. Even if we sort of look back to the Cold War, a lot of spying was about getting into the right sort of filing cabinet and photographing the right records, or accessing manuals on how tanks work and getting them copied and then put back. So information was stored in a specific place on some sort of hard copy, and it was all about sort of protecting that that information, that paper, in a physical sense, making sure that it didn't degrade, wasn't burnt or damaged, and also keeping people away from it. And that meant locks and doors and buildings and fences. As we move much more of our information into sort of electronically stored forms, computers became ubiquitous in the sort of corporate business environment. Everything was stored on either a desktop or a laptop or a server within the company. It became much more about protecting access to those networks, protecting access to the company data center physically, but very much more so from a sort of network perspective, particularly once the internet became ubiquitous. Everyone's online with email, everyone's on websites. So many more attack vectors became available in order to get into an organization. And now we're all moving to cloud-based services. I mean, everything, I imagine everyone on this this webcast, this session has been interacting with cloud services all day, whether it's streaming service, whether it's accessing your corporate sort of IT applications that may be cloud-based now, where we store data, where we process data. And so the whole model becomes much more identity-centric. It's about how do we know that the people that are accessing the data are the right people. This sort of pandemic has made the need for remote working much more sort of important, and brought that to the fore. And so how do we sort of make sure that the people that are joining using these sort of remote access services are the people they say they are? How do we make sure that they're coming in from a secure device, that they're only allowed to access the data that they need to access? All of these things have totally changed the sort of risk profile and the threat profile for how we protect information. And obviously we have to account for a range of these things, because we store, there's a long tail of how information is stored and processed across organizations. And any organization that's been around for a long time, let's say in the finance sector, probably has everything from large mainframes to the sort of latest cutting edge cloud computing environments within their sort of their IT environments. So you have to be sort of aware of all of those things. So in terms of how we see those things being attacked, phishing and business email compromise or business email spoofing are one of the major attack vectors that we see. So this certainly business phishing or spamming, sending you emails that you don't want, usually advertising either a legitimate product or some kind of fake product, but is a major thing, and we've all received a lot of spam email in our lives, I'm sure. Phishing, looking to steal your credentials, again, even more serious in this age where we're using those credentials to log into cloud services, and that gives us full access to all of our corporate documents, to all of our corporate email, corporate information. Becomes even more important to make sure that authentication process is working well. Business email compromise and spoofing is threat actors, criminals that attempt to gain access to your email and use that usually to try and make money for themselves somehow. So it might be stealing and doctoring an invoice, changing the payee information on that so that goes to any payment that's made goes to their bank account. Sometimes we just see people sending in fake invoices. Sometimes they're pretending to be the CEO or something else, some other kind of basic abuse of email functionality, people's trust, something that we call social engineering, in order to make money for themselves. And this is possibly one of the sort of biggest financial threats to organizations today. It takes a lot of money out of the pockets of organizations. Then we have post-intrusion ransomware, and this is again, you'll have seen a number of these cases in the press this year already. We have criminal groups breaking into organizations, and they will encrypt all or as much data as they can across those environments. We saw a variation of this, although not for the same effect, with WannaCry. Significant organizations having their data encrypted, made unavailable and having a significant impact on their productivity and ability to operate. So this has become a huge area for criminal actors, and they've gone from just encrypting the data and demanding usually some form of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency in return for decrypting it and getting your data back, to some other bits and pieces. In fact, Marcelle, do you want to talk a little bit about the sort of name and shame tactic evolution that we've seen with this? Oh, you're on mute there, I think.
Yeah, I think do we have a slide for that? I think we have slides for kind of each of these threat areas.
Some of those areas, okay. So certainly that's a big and evolving area. And then just the opportunistic exploitation of unpatched vulnerabilities and misconfigurations is a huge thing. It's really difficult for network admins, for network defenders, IT administrators to keep on top of all of the different software that they use that needs to be patched. And again, maybe this is one of the advantages of moving to the cloud. It's you have one organization or one vendor perhaps that can manage a whole bunch of software and keep that up to date. Maybe this will become less of a thing, but misconfigurations then play a role there as well, making sure those cloud services are operating. So we do have some examples of this later as well, but this can lead to defacement, people sort of graffitiing your website, theft of data, crypto mining, basically using your computing resources, and distribution of malware. So I mentioned a bit before about the nation state or the criminal group tracking. So we recently published 66 profiles, but that number is growing on the website of some of the groups that we track, and sort of some discussions of their profiles. So I just wanted to give you some examples to show you the kind of breadth of the activity we see. Gold Blackburn, originally sort of a banking Trojan, malware family, botnet, and has more sort of moved into dropping other pieces of malware now. But this is a long-standing sort of criminal group that has been operating for quite a while. A business email compromise group, Gold Galleon, they were targeting companies in the shipping industry, defrauding them, and then espionage groups, so looking to steal data with some more sophisticated techniques. So you can go and look at those threat profiles on the website. There's a really sort of fascinating range of groups and activity documented there, and I encourage you to go and have a look there. Okay, so over to Marcelle to talk about some of the ways we see threat actors getting into networks.
Yeah, and Rafe, maybe you want to pop that link to the threat profiles in the chat, so it's easier for people to reference that. Some different techniques that we've seen in terms of what we call initial access vector, which basically just means how the threat actors are getting into your organization. There's a wide variety, but as you can see from this diagram, it's heavily focused on phishing, which Rafe mentioned previously earlier. We're going to talk more about that. Use of credentials, and this can be anything from reuse of stolen credentials to different kinds of password attacks, so on and so forth. We're going to talk about that in more detail also. Same thing with brute force over there in the 9% section. And let's see, all the other ones that you see there. So there's many different ways that the threat actors can get into a network or organization. And this is something that we are looking at every single day. Can you go to the next slide, Rafe?
Okay.
Thanks. So first one, scanning and enumeration. That's kind of what we refer to for like one of the preliminary phases of how a threat actor is going to try to get into your network. And there's different vulnerabilities with different services, and I've listed 3 rather well-known and often exploited ones here. Apache struts, that's pretty well known because that's what was the sort of root cause of the Equifax breach that happened a few years ago. Pulse Secure VPNs and Citrix Gateway appliances are newer ones, and we've seen a lot of activity around threat actors using these vulnerabilities to gain access to organizations. And when I say use these vulnerabilities, basically, as you can see on the screen there, I've done a little snippet of the actual vulnerability information, and that comes from the CV website. And then here's an example of from exploit database, the associated exploit that goes along with that. So if I'm a threat actor, I'm going to scan an organization, look for possibly open or vulnerable ports and services. I'm going to see that an organization might be using like a Citrix appliance that has this vuln, and if they haven't, if the organization hasn't patched to correct the problem, then I'm going to use the associated exploit to get in. And this happens like, you know, wash, rinse, repeat all day long, every day. And there's like just a ridiculous amount of scanning that's happening all the time where people are looking for these kind of holes, as I would call them, to find their way in. Can you go to the next slide, Rafe? So you were going to talk about the
phishing, I can do this one. So yeah, as I said before, we see a range of phishing. The key message here is to always be suspicious. Any email you get that comes in that is certainly urging some activity, seems out of the ordinary. We see a lot of things around urgent financial transactions, or asking employees to do something in relation to a technical change. You end up clicking a link, you go through to something that looks like a service that you expect, or an internal corporate system. You put in your credentials, and then they are off to a threat actor to abuse, to gain access to your network. And lots of things about emails can be spoofed, can be sort of faked and masqueraded. There's a surprising amount of information that's presented to you, like the who it's coming from in the to line, and other bits and pieces. Most of that can be faked in a message that's sent to you, particularly if they don't really need a response either. So yeah, a very popular technique that we saw. Same sort of thing for credential-based attacks. So basic attack has always been brute forcing, just trying lots of different passwords against an account. There have been developments to sort of prevent this kind of thing. So we saw an evolution of this called password spraying. Basically, you try a large number of different accounts with a very small number of passwords in order to avoid lockouts. The idea being that in a 20,000 person organization, someone's going to have chosen password 12345, and surprisingly, there's almost always someone that's chosen that kind of password. So this, particularly against online sort of services, is a very popular attack these days, and you just see it going on all the time until there's some sort of level of success. Similar to credential stuffing, when passwords are disclosed through intrusions, they can then be sort of hoovered up and used against other services in an attempt to gain access there. So a big reason not to reuse passwords across different services as much as possible. Over to you, Marcelle.
Yeah, so one of the things that we see a lot in looking at threat actor activity is that once an attacker gets into your network, they are making use of what we refer to as native tools. We also call this living off the land. So tools that are already on your computer, the threat actors will use to gather information, to move around laterally, things like that. So, you know, think about a threat actor, they've exploited one of those vulnerabilities that I mentioned. Now they're sitting on a computer in your network. What are they going to do next? And well, unfortunately, often the answer is anything they want, but they're going to use tools to further whatever their plan is. So like PowerShell, for example, is a native tool on Windows, and is basically like a command line on steroids, and it runs different scripts. So the attackers can basically run scripts and do all sorts of things, really anything that you could write a script for. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but there's definitely things that attackers could do with all of them. And the little snippet there is just a mention of some research that we did on Bronze Union. and they notoriously use mostly administrative tools. So we kind of make the job easier sometimes. Can you go to the next slide, Rafe? So also on the tools of the trade is malware. So we see a lot of different kinds of malware, and there's what I call like off-the-shelf malware, which you can go to like GitHub and find rats and things of that nature, remote access tools to use for nefarious purposes. And then there's also malware that's delivered as a service. So on underground forums, you can purchase a piece of ransomware to use it as a service. So somebody else is going to basically build it, deliver it for you, and then you just have all the interactions with the customer and collect the ransom. So it's pretty amazing, this whole like underground economy around cybercrime, and lots of money is made there. So some of the ransomware that we've seen are the ones that I've listed there: Revol, Snatch, Networker, but there's so many more. And one of the most interesting things that we're seeing in terms of ransomware right now is this whole name and shame trend. So it used to be that the people who put ransomware on your computer, and let me just step back for a second for people who might not know what that is, but basically the attacker will encrypt all your files and then say you have to pay X number of Bitcoins or whatever, usually it's Bitcoins, to get the files decrypted so you can use them again. So now, before they take that step, they also like steal your files, exfiltrate your files, and hold them hostage essentially. So you have to pay for the decryption, but you also have to pay sort of like a double extortion fee to get your files taken off what are basically websites where they list the availability of these files to be sold to anybody who's interested. This happened recently with a large law firm that was dealing with different like famous people essentially, and same kind of thing. They're like, we're going to sell all this information if you don't pay a fee. And then the other ones that we have there are rats and info stealers. There's like, again, so many different types. So that's one of the things that our team focuses on, is just, what are we seeing? Is it affecting our clients? What's new and interesting in the space? And do we have countermeasures to protect our clients? So that's a big part of what we do here. Next slide, Rafe.
Okay, so yeah, this is the COVID-19 focused stuff we've seen. As Marcelle talked you through this research, I think we're coming up on 12:46, so we're going to rattle through this a bit faster than perhaps we planned, so yes, we can make sure we get some time to answer your questions.
Yes. So basically, it's a global pandemic. Nobody on this webinar doesn't know that, of course, but these sort of situations provide an opportunity for threat actors. Next slide. So this is an alert that came out from the US Secret Service, warning about phishing, early March, you can see. And that was kind of the beginning of some of this activity, threat activity around COVID-19. And we've seen many, many more examples. So let's just flip through these kind of quickly, Rafe. So this was an example of some nation state sponsored activity, a group called Copper Fieldstone targeting India, pretending to be from the Indian government and delivering a spreadsheet that you can see is called Health Advisory Coronavirus. And that spreadsheet, of course, was weaponized, and it wasn't just a spreadsheet, it was also delivering Crimson Rat, one of the ones I mentioned before. Next slide. And then another one, LokiBot InfoStealer, delivered by sort of bizarre WHO CDC mashup. Obviously, are two different organizations, sending people to a malicious website. Next slide. And then Revol, also known as cynical, could be another type of ransomware. They actually targeted a company called TEDx Genomics, And that's a California company, as you can see there, that's doing research in the coronavirus space. And you can see they made a little statement about, they were disappointed that somebody would attack them. But unfortunately, these days, most of these threat actors don't seem to have much of a conscience about like who they are attacking. So we're seeing a variety of healthcare organizations be attacked, hospitals, so on and so forth. There were a couple of threat groups that said that they were not going to do that kind of targeting. One of them, Maze, like notoriously made that statement and then turned around and pretty much right away attacked another healthcare group. So no honor among thieves, I guess. Next slide, Rafe. Credential harvesting, and again, this is just another thing that we see with phishing all the time. You end up clicking a link and going to like some kind of login page. In this case, it was a fake Microsoft login page, and you type in your credentials and it doesn't work. And you're like, oh, I must have typed it wrong. You type them in again. And sometimes it'll redirect you to the real site, sometimes not, but behind the scenes, there's a script that's just silently taking that data that you're typing in and storing it away for future use. All right, next slide. Okay, and of course, interestingly, there's been thousands and thousands and thousands of domains created that are some kind of riff on COVID-19 or coronavirus or whatever. They're not all malicious, of course, but some of them are. So just something to be mindful when you get any kind of communication about COVID-19, coronavirus. Just be leery. Make sure you're getting your information from legit organizations. And I don't know, I have to say it in every presentation, Rafe, don't click on links. But it's true, it'll save you a lot of grief.
Very true.
Yeah, next slide. All right, so this, I think, yes. So some mitigation techniques that we often will educate people about. First of all, user education on phishing. I mean, an interesting thing about COVID-19 is because it's such a specific theme, it's actually a little easier to detect, whereas normally you're getting all kinds of different themes, invoices or DHL shipments, things like that we see, but now it's really focused on COVID-19. And for companies that are dealing with a remote workforce and maybe not so used to that, just make sure your help desk is aware of like how to vet that people are who they are if they call in for like a password reset, so on and so forth. And then more on a sort of a network and endpoint type standpoint, detecting unusual activity from files. So if you have like a Microsoft Word document that's launching PowerShell, that's probably not good. It's doubtful it's doing anything legit. So using an endpoint solution that protects you from that is wise. And then the same thing with looking for unusual network communications, any kind of, we call it C2, command and control, communications between your host and a remote server that's run by a threat actor. SSL asserts, make sure they're legit. And then detect processes running from unusual locations. So we'll see malware land in like app data folder and run from there. And this is all very detectable, unusual activity. Next slide, Rafe. I think it's you anyway.
Yep. So in terms of some high-level general recommendations, and these apply almost as much to sort of things you can do at home, maybe not incident response plans, as well as the sort of organizational level. So patching all the things is number one there. It can be hard in the enterprise environment, but certainly as a home user, you want to be keeping your PC up to date. You want to keep your antivirus fresh with the latest updates. You want to be updating your phone and your apps, and removing the sort of vulnerabilities as they are discovered. Because as soon as things go public, they very quickly get seized upon by criminal groups or state-sponsored groups for mass exploitation. Multi-factor authentication, a huge one. Again, both in your sort of personal environment as well as in the work environment, particularly in this period of increased remote workforce, making sure that you're using some kind of additional factors of authentication, whether it's tokens or it's an app or whatever it might be. There are a range of different options for people with their sort of, whether they're using their sort of web-based email, and I mean like personal email, sort of Gmail offers these things, Hotmail, whatever it's called these days, live mail, Facebook, other services, where they offer sort of multi-factor or strong authentication. You want to take advantage of those things, keep people out of your services, and privacy, even if your password happens to get compromised. So the idea here is that you have a password, but then you also have something else, and that might be you have to acknowledge a prompt on your phone. You have to type in a number that's produced by an app on your phone. You get an SMS message, whatever it might be. There are lots of different methods, but make sure you use those. Endpoint monitoring in the enterprise environment, sort of talked about that a bit. User awareness training. Think about how you spot a phish, that kind of stuff. Password management, huge topic by itself. Not going to dwell on it, but yeah, big part of that. And then incident response plan, particularly in the enterprise. When you have an incident, it's chaos. People are running around trying to figure out what to do. There'll be business disruption, whatever it might be. You want to make sure that you have a plan in advance. You know who's responsible for what. You know who's making decisions, who you need to talk to, who you need to inform, what third parties you need to get involved. If you're bringing in an external provider, how do you contact them? All that sort of good stuff. Get it revised in advance. So we've just flagged a number of resources here that might be useful to people. There's the threat profiles I mentioned earlier. There's the sort of COVID-19 related resource center on the website. There's a podcast there and a couple of sort of great blogs about different aspects of the sort of COVID-19 threat, and also sort of digital transformation that some organizations may be trying to sort of push through quickly as a result of this. Okay, we're a little bit behind, but we have time for a few questions. Andy, what have you got for us?
I am back. Thanks very much, Rafe and Marcelle. Great presentation. I hope everyone in the audience found that useful. So we've got 5 minutes to go. We've got a few questions in the chat, so I'm going to work through these as quickly as possible. So straight into it for Rafe and Marcelle. Do you have any recommendations for people who are looking to get into threat intelligence, perhaps for reading to do or skills that are particularly useful?
Yes. So thanks, Megan, for that question. I think learning how to read some of the different threat intel feeds, like what kind of data are you getting from that? What are different indicators to look for? I don't know, like I can't really think of any kind of book in particular. I don't know if you have any in mind, Rafe, but being familiar with like reports like the Verizon data breach report that comes out every year, which is a huge comprehensive report on different kinds of threats. Attending webinars and things like that talk about threat intel, and really just become familiar with what is a threat, how do you mitigate, and where do you go from there?
Yeah, I would agree. I think I've also found, certainly on the intelligence piece, that the sort of critical thinking aspects and the writing aspects are the things that I've needed to practice more. Being able to communicate, particularly when the subject you're dealing with has a lot of uncertainty in it, is really important. So the technical stuff you can learn through sort of various mediums, but those other skills take a while to sort of hone and can be practiced in any setting. Doesn't have to be a threat intelligence related setting. But yeah, otherwise reading the sort of the reports that come out, and there's lots of great stuff on Twitter, stuff you can view on YouTube. Yeah, lots of great resources.
Excellent, thanks both. I know we've got a few minutes left just to address something that came through by the questions. There's a question about can we can we share the URLs that Rafe shared on his slide and some of the links to what we've referenced throughout the presentation? And we absolutely can. We'll work with the We Are the City team and make sure everybody on today gets a follow-up on that. Thank you for that. So just moving on to the next question. Have you seen any AI utilised as an attack weapon?
Marcelle?
Yeah, not really. I mean, so artificial intelligence, it sort of makes me think of like, you know, Terminator, where the bots are running the world kind of thing. And I don't know that we've really seen a whole lot of that in actual practice. What we do see are botnets, for example, that are massive in nature and delivering all kinds of things, but there's still, you know, a human being behind that, dreaming up all the badness. The thought of AI generating it kind of terrifies me a little bit.
Yeah, I think certainly the human beings are doing well enough as it stands to not need to invest in the AI piece. I mean, the only bit that sort of I've seen people talk about, and I'm still quite skeptical about, is there was a case of alleged sort of the faking of a voice of a person who worked for a company and using that to sort of conduct a fraud operation over the phone. So we see these sort of deep fakes, sort of images generated by sort of AI and machine learning algorithms. And there's been claims that sort of similar attacks have happened over the phone, although I'm quite deeply skeptical of that. I think it's much easier for a person to mimic someone's voice than to go to the extent of something under sort of Mission Impossible and record them and reconstruct it from the phonemes.
Exactly. Most threat actors that we see are not going to go to those lengths. There's some much easier ways to do things, and that's typically, you know, they go the easy route. Why wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
Great, thanks both. We're at the top of the hour now, so I think we'll have to make this the last question. So if we haven't gotten to your question today, apologies. We'll do our best to follow up with you in partnership with the We Are the City team. So just very briefly for Rafe and Marcelle, does or can misinformation work as an effective attack weapon? And how do you mitigate that? An example, we saw how quickly information spread around the app House Party being hacked on social media.
So yes, it's definitely a topic that I think lots of different organizations and security professionals are struggling with, misinformation and disinformation, and how do you weed that out from the different sources that people are seeing. And so yes, it's a very insidious and potent attack. Thomas Rid has just written a book on this for those looking for book recommendations, talking about the history of sort of active measures. And I think that will probably sort of discuss this sort of topic quite well. But it's definitely a problem and becoming increasingly a problem in a whole range of areas.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Well, just to wrap things up, thanks very much to Rafe and Marcelle for presenting today. Great presentation. Really hope you all enjoyed the session today, and thanks to our friends at We Are the City for inviting us to come and present. So goodbye from the Secureworks team, and I hope everybody has a good day.
Yeah, thanks all. Thanks for attending.
Yeah, thanks for coming.